Hey there, fiber junkies. Welcome back to the Color Cauldron. I'm Johanna, the owner and dyer behind Potion Yarns, and I am the host of this episode. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome and thank you for giving us a chance. If you're a returning viewer, thank you for checking us out and coming back to see what I had to say. Today for episode 8, we are picking up our sock series with what I'm hoping will be our final installment of that. Not that I haven't enjoyed talking socks and nothing but socks with you, but I think that we're about to get to the end of the information I have for you, at least for this round. We may come back and revisit it in future, especially if I get more questions about it. And I am thinking about maybe doing a couple technique videos on some specific things for socks. I was going to do the magic loop cast on with 2 at a time. And I'm also thinking about I had a couple questions about heel tutorials. The hard one with that is there's so many different types of heels. It's hard for me to just pick one and be like, here's how you turn a heel, because it really varies, but depending on whether you're doing toe up, cuff down, whether you're doing 2 at a time, 1 at a time, and what technique you're doing. Like the fish lips kiss heel that I mentioned a few weeks ago is a new one to me that I just did. It's one of the easiest ones I've done, so it's one I highly recommend for beginners. And I also recommend it for seasoned pros because it's really easy and fun, and it's super easy to like fit into literally any pattern. So if you have not already gone and bought the fish lips kiss heel pattern on Ravelry, it is only $1 and she gives you tons of information. She has a really well written out explanation of what it is, why it works, how you put it into any pattern you want, how to do it, lots of pictures, lots of explanations. It's really great information and it's only $1, so go over to Ravelry and buy that pattern if you haven't. But yeah, there's so many different types of heels. That's only one among hundreds that you could do. And I've only done a handful based on the patterns that I followed. I usually try to go with whatever the recommended heel in a pattern is, just so I can try different techniques. But I have discovered a few over the years that are my favorite go-tos. And if I'm not sure, or if I start working it and then really don't like how it's working out, and I'll sometimes rip it back and just substitute my favorite heel. But I'm not a big fan of ripping out, so I only do that if it's really not working for me. So anyways, all that to say, that's why I'm not sure about the heel tutorial. I know a couple of you guys asked for a heel tutorial. I would love to give that to you. I'm just still working out the logistics of whether or not that would really be helpful and practical in the long run, and if so, how to do it. But I definitely want to do the magic loop 2 at a time cast on video. It should be pretty easy and quick. But I think that would really help some of you guys who were curious about the magic loop or curious about 2 at a time socks. And even for those of you who like it, I thought it might be a good little easy reminder just to have a tutorial video for you to go back, because I know if you're anything like me, when I do toe up 2 at a time socks, I can remember how to cast on with magic loop. And if I do 2 at a time cuff down on 2 circular needles, so I have a 16-inch and a 24-inch or whatever it is, 2 separate needles, if I do it that way, I can remember how to do the cast on. But if I do magic loop 2 at a time cuff down socks, every time, I've even done that like several times, and every time I have to go back and look up how to cast it on. It's so funny because it doesn't sound like it'd be that hard, but actually because of the way the magic loop goes, by having 2 of them, you have to cast it on like half of the stitches on one sock and then cast on the other sock and then go back and cast on the other half. It's kind of a pain, so I have to look it up every time, but it's worth it because then at the end you have 2 socks done, no second sock syndrome, and all that jazz. So today for our hopefully final or close to final. If we don't quite fit everything in today, we may have to do another video, but we're gonna try to fit it all in, even if it's a slightly longer one. So today I wanted to talk about a couple other things, starting with second sock syndrome. Just a very brief little thing. I had to mention this. I've talked about it a couple other times on the podcast, but I never like discussed what it actually is. So I'm sure you guys have figured it out from what I've said before if you didn't already know. But just in case you're a new viewer or you didn't figure it out or you missed it because you weren't really paying attention to the video, you're just kind of half listening or something in the past, let's just talk about second sock syndrome really quickly. What is second sock syndrome? Often abbreviated as SSS in knitting blogs and on Ravelry and things. This is an illness that afflicts knitters when you have finished 1/2 of a pair of socks. So if you do your socks 1 at a time, you get all the way through 1 sock and finish it. And instead of having that great feeling of accomplishment of finishing a project, now you have to go back and cast on and do the exact same thing. This is why I like 2 at a time socks. I am one of those creative types who I struggle to do the same thing exactly the same way ever. That's why I like being a hairstylist, because even if I were to do everything exactly the same way, when you come back in 6 weeks from now, your hair will be different than it was 6 weeks ago. So even if I changed nothing, it's quite likely something about your hair will have changed, and it probably will be a small enough change you won't even notice it, but there's always a little bit of difference, which is why I hate it when somebody's like, oh, it was perfect last time, I want it exactly the same, just do exactly what you did. And I'm like, well, you're not the same as you were 6 weeks ago, so thanks for screwing me over. There's no way I can do that. But also, I'm not good at doing the exact same thing. Like, I can remember what I did most of the time, and I can do the same motions and do the same haircut, and you know, I have all the geometric points figured out and all of that stuff. It's not that I can't, but there are just little tiny things that change it. And again, like I said, most of the time it's imperceptible, but it won't be an exact copy, which is why I struggle, back to socks, with doing 1 at a time socks, because even if I write down how many rows I did on the gusset, even if I write down how many stitches I picked up, even if I write down how many I cast on, even if I write down every little thing and take pictures along the way, most of the time there's going to be something that either I'm like, oh, I'll just fudge that. Oh, I made a mistake and I don't want to go back and fix it, so I'll just fudge it. Or sometimes I'll think I have counted it out correctly and I somehow end up with 2 extra rows in sock 2 than I did in sock 1, so it's slightly longer or whatever. I'm really bad about that. So this is why I'm such a big fan of 2 at a time socks, because I really like to get to the end of a pair, and when I cast off, whether I cast off at the toe or the top, it is done. It's done. I never have to knit that pattern again unless I want to, and I don't have to do it right away, and I can immediately put on my socks and wear a finished pair. I don't even block my socks in most cases unless they're lace, although I have asked my husband if he can make me a pair of sock blockers. I don't know if it'll happen right away because he's really busy with work, but I really want a pair of sock blockers, and I asked for them for Christmas and my birthday last year and nobody got them for me. So I really want some, and I told my husband I really need them. And I'm using this podcast and my Instagram business as my excuse of why I need them, because I'm doing the box of socks cal, and I was like, see, I have to have like sock blockers so my photos of my socks each month and photos on the podcast and everything look really, really good and professional. But it's really just an excuse because I want sock blockers. But anyways, so I like to do them 2 at a time so I don't have second sock syndrome, because I hate going back and casting on the same pattern immediately unless I really want to. Now, I did that with the Stephen West Exploration Station shawl because it was just amazing and so much fun, and I had way too many colorways I wanted to do that I couldn't pick one. I narrowed it down to 2, so I made 2, one right after the other, and I loved it. But I don't usually do that. So anyways, that's enough about second sock syndrome. There's a whole host of other reasons why I like 2 at a time, and if you're curious about that, go back and watch my first all about sock knitting video that I did. I think it was week 3. I believe it was week 3 that we did that, episode 3, but you can go back and check that out. The thing that I wanted to mostly focus on though today is one of the most crucial things that you can learn to get well-fitting socks that you are proud of and happy about, and socks that will fit you or fit the recipient if you're giving them as a gift. And that is understanding the concept of ease and fit when it applies to socks. So if you're not familiar with the concept of ease and what it is, let me just give you a quick little explanation of that. So ease is the difference between your actual body measurements and the garment that you wear. Another way of thinking about it is ease is how flexible the fabric is and how much you're able to move comfortably within the fabric, or how tight or how loose the fabric is on you. So for example, if I'm making a sweater and my bust measurement, getting really personal here with you guys, my bust is, I think it's right now, I think the last time I measured it, it's right at 34 3/4 or a little over, just under 35 inches. So if I want my sweaters to fit really nicely but not tight across my boobs, I need to make sure that my sweater is going to have at least an inch or 2 of positive ease. What I mean by positive ease is my sweater measurement, if my bust size is 34 3/4, say, I want to make my sweater at least 35 and 3/4 or 36 and 3/4. So a lot of times what I'll do is just kind of take the difference of that and I'll be like, okay, I'm going to aim for about 36 1/4 or 36 1/2. And then that gives me a little extra room so that my actual sweater measurement is slightly larger than my actual body. Most American modern clothes are designed with 2 to 4 inches of positive ease. So that kind of gives you a rough guideline. If you're making something like a coat or a sweater, like a cardigan that is definitely more of like an outerwear jacket style that you would always be wearing over other layers. So like right now I'm wearing a really thin shirt and then my so-faded sweater. If I was gonna put a jacket over this, I would want my jacket to have probably at least 4 or 5 inches of positive ease in the bust area and under my arms so that I could get multiple layers underneath it and still get my jacket on. There's also something called negative ease. Obviously, if positive ease means it's larger than your body, negative ease just means it's smaller than your body. That might freak you out and make you think, why on earth would you make it smaller than your body? And that's because knitting fabric is very stretchy, more so than crochet in most cases, and more so than like a woven fabric. So knit fabric, as you all know, if you've knit at all a little bit of time, you can stretch it and it'll kind of snap back into its shape. You can pull it and the stitches will go pretty far. Now, some of the elasticity will be affected by your fiber content, your gauge, how loose or tight your gauge is, the needle size that you chose, the stitch pattern you chose. We all know ribbing is really, really stretchy when you do like knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2. That's really stretchy and gives you a lot more elasticity. So it might like pull in like this if it's just laying on the table. But then once you start to put your foot into the sock, it'll stretch to go over your whole foot and your ankle bone and everything. And then it'll hug your leg again, which is why a lot of sock patterns have some kind of ribbing at the top to help hold it up. So stitch pattern also affects how stretchy it is. But in general, knitted fabric is very stretchy, even if it's just stockinette or something. And so because of that, a lot of knit items are made to have a little bit less ease than, say, a woven cloth or just like your basic average cotton t-shirt. So because of that, it's really important when you're making garments that you swatch and understand the characteristics of the fiber content you're using and your gauge so that you can understand, okay, are my socks gonna stay up okay? Are they gonna hug my leg all right? Or are they gonna get real baggy and loose and fall off? There is nothing more discouraging than making a beautiful pair of socks and putting in 15-20 hours or more on a pair of lovely hand knit socks using a very nice fancy hand-dyed yarn and then having it turn out to be too loose, and as soon as you put it on, it bags around your ankle, right? We've all had that happen. Hopefully you haven't had that happen. I've had that happen multiple times, and it's really discouraging. So it's really important to understand ease and fit. This was something that when I first started knitting socks, I did not understand. I did not get the concept of ease and fit. And when I did first start learning about ease early on in my knitting journey, I only really thought of it when it applied to like sweaters that would go across my boobs or something that would go across my shoulders like a shrug. I didn't think about it as opposed to like I was kind of putting socks in the same category as shawls and scarves and hats, where it's like, okay, technically you need a hat to fit, yes. But hats, most heads are within a certain range. Hats can stretch a lot. Hats are a lot easier to get to fit a wider range of people than a sweater, say, or something like that. So I kind of just lumped socks in that category, which was a terrible, terrible decision because of all of the garments I make, I am most picky about the fit of my socks now than even my sweaters. So I have two things I want to talk about with this. When we're talking about ease, I do want to tell you a little bit my personal guidelines for ease and fit and how I figure it out and some tips that you can do to find your comfort level of ease and fit. But I wanted to show you an example of positive ease and how important it is to swatch and figure out what you are going for in your final garment. I don't know if you guys noticed, let me pull off my warm cozy blanket for a second. But you guys may have noticed that I am sporting my newly finished So Faded today. I don't know if you can see that. I did cast this off last week, I believe, and I haven't gotten photos of it yet, so it's not up on my Instagram yet, but I've shown it on the podcast in process a couple times. I showed the yarns before I started knitting, and I just cast off last week, so I'm wearing it today. And I did not block the sweater because I'm not a fan of over blocking. I think most knitters over block. Definitely there are times when it is essential to block, and there's other times where it maybe not be essential, but it's a good idea. So I do it, but I only block when I feel like it's necessary and when it's going to add to the piece, not take anything away. And so I did not block this sweater for two reasons. First of all, I didn't think it needed it. It had a nice shape. The ribbing helps it lay flat so it doesn't curl on the edges. The rest is just stockinette, nothing fancy, garter at the top. Nothing that I really needed to block. And then secondly of all, I did not block because I felt that it did not turn out the way I had envisioned. I'm just gonna be really honest, and I actually almost cried when I tried this on after I took it off the needles, because I did kind of do a gauge swatch, but I also didn't exactly do a gauge swatch. So what I mean by that is I did not swatch with these exact yarns. But I had used this same base yarn from my shop. This is the Gaia Fingering. It's 100% Superwash Merino 2-ply fingering weight yarn. I had used this exact same yarn on the exact same size needles with a stockinette swatch for an earlier project a few weeks ago, and I still had the swatch. So I just figured it's the exact same yarn, it's the exact same stitch pattern, it's the exact same needle, everything is exactly the same. The colorway is the only difference, so I don't need to swatch, right? Generally, that is true. I don't think that the reason that this failed is because I did not swatch with these specific yarns. So I did my gauge and was like, yeah, I'm getting it. I'll go ahead and cast on. And then I knit up, because you start at the top. So I knit up a little ways. And then after I had 3 or 4 inches, I checked my gauge. Spot on. I was like, I'm good. I don't need to worry. So I kind of didn't worry. And then the problem is I got into it and I started knitting, and I was just loving the colors so much, and the fading was just so pretty, and I just did not want to stop knitting with any of the colors. When it was time to transition to the next color, I was just like, oh, it's time to transition already, I don't want to yet. So I ended up going longer than I meant to, and I had measured my body and I had measured the sweater in process multiple times, and I did the formula that she gives you in the pattern for deciding based on how many colors you're fading. You decide how far you knit with each color before you start the fade section. I did the formula not once, not twice, but 3 times, and kept double checking as I went. I was like, yep, I'm spot on, I'm good, I'm good. It still ended up turning out way too freaking long. And the only thing I can think of is that the swatch I made was pretty small. It was like a 4x4 or whatever it's supposed to be. Actually, I think it was like a 4x2.5 because I didn't knit as far as I should have. It's probably part of the reason it got so long. I didn't do my row gauge. So also, I strongly believe that when you have a larger garment like this, no way is it going to be the same on a little swatch as it is on a big heavy garment, especially because I was knitting this in the round with no seams on a circular needle, so the whole weight of the garment is just hanging off the cables, and it was pulling it and stretching it, and I think that's why it got so long. But my goal was to make the sweater more fitted through here, so it was basically like that. And I wanted it to end at my hip bones, which are right about here. I wanted the ribbing to be like around this area. Yeah, as you can see, I'm several inches off in both directions. So this is why it's important, though, to check your ease and to know how you like your garments to fit. I personally like my garments to fit a little tighter and to have more negative ease. So I frequently, when I am deciding which size to make, when I have almost a 35-inch bust, I frequently go down to the 32, 33, or 34 size bust. I typically make the 34 if it's more of a modern style or a cardigan that's gonna go over other things. If it's a pullover though, I will usually go down to the 32-inch bust, or even a little lower sometimes depending on the style and my gauge and everything, because I like it to fit more fitted. I like my clothes to be very fitted. Not tight, I like them to be comfortable, but unless I'm specifically making like a slouchy cozy sweater or a jacket style cardigan, like the I Am Groot cardigan I talked about last week on the podcast in episode 7, I showed a swatch for a cardigan that I'm wanting to cast on. And it's kind of like a big cabled, long line cardigan, almost like a coat style. And so for that one, I definitely want a lot of positive ease because I'm gonna be wearing another sweater underneath it probably. I'm gonna be like cuddling up in it on the sofa with tea on a cold day. I want it to be real big and cozy and loose and feel very comfortable. But this, I wanted to be a fitted pullover, and I did not take that into account. And so my gauge was a little bit off when it got into the big size. Like on a tiny gauge swatch, it was fine, but as I got bigger, it wasn't fine, and we all know gauge swatches lie. And so because of that, combined with the fact that I didn't go down, I was kind of hovering between deciding to make the extra small and the small size. And I went with the small thinking, it's fine, it's 34 inches, that's close enough. It's like, or maybe it's 34 and a half, I can't remember. But I felt like it was like really close, and I felt like there'd be like 0 to maybe like a ½ inch of negative ease. And I was like, that's close enough. It wasn't close enough, especially when my gauge turned out to be slightly off as well. So I ended up deciding, by the time I figured this out, because I tried it on when it was like down to here, and it fit just fine, but it was on the needle, it was kind of weird and wonky, so I didn't get an exact accurate fit. The sleeves weren't in yet, and the sleeves are like perfect. They're just about how I wanted them. It's the body that I don't like. So that's also weird, because I think I have the same gauge. I use the same needle and everything. I don't know why the body is not great and the sleeves are fine. But I still like it. It's still a tunic style. It'll work. But I'm seriously contemplating casting on another So Faded and either dropping down a needle size and or going down to the extra small. I've even thought about doing both because I really want it to be like fitted. But I think I might just keep the same needle size and drop down to the extra small. I'm going to do my gauge swatch off of the finished sweater and think about it. Because I have several really fantastic kits in my shop right now. And I'm seriously thinking about casting on another So Faded that would be more fitted in another colorway. I'm kind of thinking the green and black colorway that I have in there that has like Samhain and Luminous Algae and my Edgar Allan Poe and Toil and Trouble, all those different colors. It's like green and black and gray. It's fabulous. So I don't know if I'll do that, but I'm thinking about it. But I wanted to show you that because ease is really important. And some people really like their sweaters more roomy and some people like them more fitted like I do. Now, how does that relate to socks? Here's where it gets tricky. Even if you like your sweaters more roomy, when it comes to socks, you don't want roomy. Believe me, if you want a big cozy house sock that's kind of slouchy and comfy and snuggly on Saturday mornings to pad around your house and that's it, you still want negative ease in your socks. You just want to use a thicker yarn or a cozier stitch, like a brioche stitch in the cuff so that it's real cozy and thick and full, or do double knit socks, perhaps with 2 colors so they're reversible, something like that, but you still want negative ease. So everyone out there, no matter your foot size, no matter how tight or loose you like your clothing, everyone say after me, I will knit my socks with negative ease. I will knit my socks with negative ease. I will knit my socks with negative ease. You have to get that in your head because it really makes a difference. When I first started knitting socks, I did not understand this, like I mentioned. And so I would literally measure my foot. I would take the measurement of my foot and I would go until, when it says in a pattern, like knit the foot until 1.5 inches before the desired length. I would literally go until 1.5 inches of the end of my foot, or even add a ½ inch because I was trying to make it comfy and cozy, right? Dumb Joe, dumb. Just not informed yet. Let's say it that way. That's the nicer way. It wasn't that I was dumb. I was just not, I was a new knitter. I wasn't very good yet. I didn't understand. Nobody taught me yet. So I've learned, and now I'm passing on my knowledge to you so you can avoid the floppy, awful, ill-fitting socks that I made my first several pairs. So it's really important that you consider this, and when you take measurements of your foot, you measure accurately. So I always measure the bottom of my foot, and the best way to do this is to have a friend help you, and you stand on a piece of paper or a piece of cardboard, and they draw an outline around the edge of your foot, and then you can measure the outline. So much more accurate than trying to hold it up and measure it this way, although you can do that if you need to. But make sure you get a measurement of your foot, and then you're going to want to take about 10% of your measurement down. Another way of thinking about this is ½ inch to 1 inch of negative ease, anywhere between a ½ inch and 1 inch. I wouldn't go more than 1 inch. I did that one time. I did, I think, 1.75 inches less or something. Terrible, way too tight. It stretched my socks too far and they ended up splitting really easily. I had to either choose to repair them or throw them away, and I bet you can guess what I picked. I threw them away because I don't repair socks. I just knit more of them. Man, that makes me sound like such a materialistic, terrible consumerist person. I just had a lot of sock yarn in my stash. I was trying to use up, you guys. Don't judge me. Also, I'm really bad at repairing socks. There will not be a section on darning your socks in this series because I don't know how to do it. There's a lot of videos and articles and resources online if you Googled how to darn socks if you're really interested in learning. Unfortunately, you won't find it here. So, yeah, I would suggest starting with a ½ inch of negative ease, and then considering maybe going down to 1 inch. If you're doing cuff down, you can kind of test this, but this is another reason why I like toe up socks. You can try them on as you go. Start with 1 inch of negative ease as you're knitting, and when you have, so let's say that your foot is 8 inches long, okay? And you're knitting from the toe up, and your pattern tells you that you need to stop 1.5 inches before the heel, the end of your foot, to start the gusset increases, right? So if your foot is 8 inches and you stop 1.5 inches, that brings you down to 6.5. But you want 1 inch of negative ease. So take down another inch, and that's 5.5. At 5.5 inches, try it on your foot and see how it's feeling. Pull it and stretch it and see how much give your yarn has based on your stitch pattern gauge, etc. You may want to keep going a little more. So if you did a ½ inch of ease on your 8 inch long foot, you would actually stop at 6 inches, because it'd be 6.5 for the 1.5 inch plus a ½ inch of positive ease. 6 inches shy of the heel, you would stop and start your increases or your heel shaping, whatever type your pattern is having you do at that point. So I hope that makes some sense and helps you out a little bit. I cannot tell you how important this is. And it's also really important around the circumference of your leg up here. Usually the leg circumference and the foot circumference are the same unless you're doing knee highs. So, but if they're not for you, make sure that you measure that on your actual leg and foot before you start a pattern. And if the pattern says, oh, the foot circumference and leg circumference are the same, or the schematic shows that they're both 6 inches around, make sure you measure yours, because yours might not be. You might have wider calves or narrower calves. You might have a really wide foot. So you need to make sure that you are knitting for you, because that's the beauty of hand knit socks. You are knitting for you or the recipient. And so you are making custom fit socks. That's why they take 20 hours, people, because they're custom built to be perfect for you or your recipient. That's why you don't find hand knit socks at craft markets for $5. Because, God, I hope you don't anyways. You can't even find them for 15 bucks, because the yarn doesn't even cost 15 bucks for most of our socks, right? Like, many of us are spending $20 or more on a skein of sock yarn or a couple skeins, and then we're knitting, even if you're getting the like mass-produced just basic stuff at Joann's or something. Again, no judgment, several of my socks are knit out of that. Even at those prices, you're gonna pay at least $6 or $7 a ball, and you'll need 2 balls of those little ones. So you're gonna need, you're gonna have at least $12 or $14 in yarn, if not more, and then you have 20 hours of your time. These are custom items. These are luxury, high-end items. So don't sell yourself short, and don't feel embarrassed if you're giving them as gifts. These are worth, like, I don't even know, 60 bucks, 80 bucks, I don't know, a lot, okay? So, but that's why it's worth taking the time to make sure you do it right. That's why it's important to educate yourself on fiber content, on needles and gauge. That's why it's important to understand fit and ease. Take the time to sketch a little pattern on paper or cardboard of your recipient's foot. Take the time to read up. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, in the episode where I gave you resources for sock knitting, I just gave you a whole bunch of book resources and talked about my favorites. Read those books. They all talk about ease and negative ease and how to size your socks and how to figure it out. Go down in the pattern. If you can't jigger the numbers, drop down a couple needle sizes and try knitting a gauge swatch that way. It's really important, and I promise you'll thank me in the end when your socks are beautifully fitting, they stay up, and you don't have baggy end toes like I did for the longest time. Okay? All right, I think we have a little bit more time, and I wanted to wrap up our sock series. Oh, we're almost done, you guys. Except for our tutorials, our instructional videos that I may or may not get to, but probably will at some point, just maybe not right away. So I'm gonna actually bring the camera just a little bit closer so that you can see the detail in these stitch patterns, because I wanted to talk to you guys about different stitch patterns for socks. Okay, now that we're back from moving the camera and adjusting the lighting, okay, I'm gonna be honest with you guys. Not only did I move the camera and adjust the lighting, but then I sat down and recorded a 15-minute video, I thought, and then I got up, the camera wasn't on. So I sat down and recorded again. This time the camera was on. And I cut off the top of my head, and every time I held a sock up, you only saw the bottom, and I was like talking up here, and I don't have any help today. I usually do these videos on my own, but the last like 2 or 3 I've done in the evenings just because of the time schedule working out instead of during the day. And my husband has been home, and he's graciously helped set it up, and he'll start the camera and like give me a thumbs up and everything, and then I go. He's not here today, and I am really missing him because I've recorded this video like 4 times. let's try this again. So basically I just wanted to bring you guys in closer because I wanted to show you the detail in stitch patterns, because I wanted to talk about my personal favorite stitch patterns and things, and just kind of give you some suggestions when you're choosing sock patterns. So really there's nothing wrong with anything out there. Like, there's no right or wrong is what I'm trying to say. You can choose, if you like cables, knit cables. If you like lace, knit lace. If you don't like anything but plain vanilla or ribbing, just stick with that. Whatever you want to do. There is no wrong answer. It's just, what do you like? What is right for you? What is wrong for you? Or for your recipient if you're knitting for someone else. Like, if you have a girl you're knitting for who just is really not into pink and lacy girly things and picot edges, maybe don't knit her Barbie pink lacy socks with a picot edge and a frilly cuff. You know, just saying, do what's right for her. So I'm gonna start with just simple plain stuff. I'm gonna be really honest, as boring as it sounds, my very favorite type of sock to knit is a plain vanilla sock. Like these I knit from a sock blank. I've shown these on the podcast several times. I'm sorry you guys are seeing the same ones over and over, but many of my socks are in terrible disrepair or have holes in them or have been thrown out or whatever, and I just really like to show you the nicer looking ones. And I also like to show ones that have more indie dyed yarns and things, since that's kind of what this is about. But this just has a little bit of ribbing at the top and then plain stockinette all the way down. It's my most portable project, it's my favorite project, and I don't have to worry about stuffing it into a shoe because it's nice and thin. There's no bulkiness from bobbles or cables or any of that crap on the top, so there's no worries about it fitting into a shoe, and it's just awesome. These are my favorite types of socks to knit. My other favorite type of sock to knit is also really good for wild, crazy yarns like the plain stockinette stitches, and that is to take the ribbing all the way down the leg, and then when you split for the heel, or all the way up, all the way down the leg, split for the heel, you go into stockinette and just knit the foot in stockinette. If you're doing it toe up, you do stockinette all the way up and then start your ribbing after you finish your heel shaping. I love that because keeping all the ribbing on the leg the whole way down makes it a much tighter fit. This is really excellent for if you are gifting socks. This is my favorite hack for gifting hand knit socks. If you are off even a tiny fraction of an inch, it can make a difference in more complicated stitch patterns sometimes. If your gauge is a little looser, or you maybe didn't measure accurately, or if you're like me, you ask someone to send you their measurements, and half the time they're wrong, right? And so you make something to those measurements and give it to them for Christmas, and they're like, oh, you know, the socks you made me were great, but they don't stay up, they keep falling down off of my leg. And I'm like, well, that's because you didn't measure your leg properly, because I knit them to the dimensions you sent. So maybe you need to learn how to take measurements. Here's the thing, most people in our modern world do not know how to measure themselves for clothing. They do not have a clue, and we have to educate them as crafters. We need to learn and know what we're doing, and then we need to educate our family members. So whenever possible, I try to actually just ask someone, hey, can I come over and take your measurements really fast, or come over and draft a pattern really fast, and I'll like trace their foot or measure it and keep notes myself, because I know that I'm doing it right that way. But if you're a little bit off, the ribbing will hug in and make it tighter and cling to the leg more, so you don't have to worry about being slightly off. Now if you're way off, it's still gonna bag. But if you're just a little off, or if they're just a little bit wider at the top of their calf than at the bottom, or they have no shaping, it's just like a straight solid line, there's like no calf shaping at all, this will help cling a little bit better and disguise some of that and still help it fit well. The other thing that I like is I do like lacy socks, so I wanted to show you my favorite pair of lacy socks that I have. This is the chrysanthemum something or other pattern that I mentioned a couple weeks ago on the podcast by Hunter Hammerson, and if you can see this, it is the absolutely most gorgeous lace in here. I just really love this, and it has a picot edge, you guys. The picot cuff is like my favorite. I just love it. So she does the lace all the way around. This is a cuff down sock, so you start at the top and then knit down. When you split for the heel, you start doing the bottom of the foot in stockinette, which is really important to keep any patterning just on the top of your foot. That makes it less bulky in a shoe, but it also means that you don't have to walk and step all over that patterning. And if you have lace or cables or something bulky, it can be a little uncomfortable in your shoe sometimes, or just standing for long periods on that, so it's really nice to have a stockinette bottom. Most patterns will have that already built in, but if you're writing your own, that's something to keep in mind. Again, there's no wrong answers, so you can try whatever you want. Maybe you'll end up discovering you like it. Then I have this other Hunter Hammerson pattern. This is the Cataphil, which I also showed on the podcast a couple weeks ago. Again, sorry for the repeats, but these are really great examples of what I was talking about. This is another one that has ribbing all the way down, but it's a twisted rib. So she did a knit one through the back loop, purl one. So you're knitting one through the back loop instead of the front. Then you're purling like normal all the way around every round. That makes the knit stitches really pop and give it this great sculptural quality. And then she has this really beautiful little lace panel down the side, and it goes down the leg and then it travels across the foot. I don't have my sock blocker, so I'll have to use my hand, but it travels across the foot down to the toe, and it's just beautiful. I adore these socks so much, and I love that the ribbing really helps it stay up on my leg. These ones, when I put them on, they do not bag throughout the day. They don't sag and start to fall down. They stay up because of this really tight ribbing that keeps it really elastic and really strong and helps it conform to the shape of my leg. So I love doing ribbing all the way down the leg. And like you just saw, you can incorporate ribbing into a really pretty pattern. It doesn't have to be just boring old knit to, purl to, ribbing all the way down. Although I love those kinds of socks, so there's nothing wrong with that. And the last one I wanted to show you is really great with indie dyed yarns because it's awesome for those kind of wildly variegated skeins or the hand-painted skeins where it's not really self-striping exactly, but it's got a lot of busyness going on, and you can't do just any pattern with a busy yarn, right? So it's nice to have something that you can do beyond plain old stockinette or plain old ribbing to give a little spice and attitude to your socks, but not have it overwhelm the stitch pattern. You don't want the yarn to be so busy that the stitch pattern gets lost. So this is one of my favorite patterns for that. This is the Bobbles and Slips pattern from the Knitting More Circles Around Socks book that I mentioned a couple weeks ago by Auntie Gillingham. And this gives you an amazing slip stitch pattern down the whole leg that really helps to break up those colors and add some pop and some sass and excitement, but it doesn't overwhelm the colors. You can see it really looks just gorgeous. And I've done this with even brighter like neon skeins, and it's fantastic. Now this one has the bobbles at the top, that's why it's called Bobbles and Slips. You can totally cut that out. The first time I knit this pattern, I just skipped the bobbles. I did plain ribbing, and then I did the leg pattern as you see it here with the slip stitches and then the stockinette foot, and I loved it. One of my favorite pairs of socks, and a little bit more plain and a little less crafty, bobbly, crazy. If you're not a big fan of bobbles, I know these are a sore subject for many people. I personally love bobbles, but only in the right context. This one was borderline for me. I think I do like them, especially in this colorway, but it was borderline. I almost didn't put them on, and then I decided to just live a little, and then I decided I liked them. But I probably won't knit it again this way. If I do this pattern again, I probably just would do plain ribbing at the top and then this awesome slip stitch pattern. There are hundreds of slip stitch patterns in stitch dictionaries. There are hundreds of sock patterns using slip stitches on Ravelry. If you just go Google or search on Ravelry, I mean, for slip stitch sock patterns, you will find a lot. Some great, some not so great. A lot of it's just up to your personal taste and what patterns you like. So go check those out and try those, but that's a really great way to use those very vibrant, very crazy skeins. Okay. That's about all we have for the sock portion today. There's one other thing I want to show you as just a little update from last week's video. But I think that we're going to wrap up our sock series this week. I got everything in that I specifically wanted to talk about. There's still tons more we could talk about. We could go into talking about sock blockers and why you should block your socks or not. We could go into talking about, different tools that help with your sock knitting. We could go into talking about specific patterns. We could do more tutorials. Like I mentioned, I think I will try to do a few more tutorials maybe, but it's iffy, we'll see. So this is probably going to be the official end of our sock series. For now, we may revisit it in future, but I want to get back into other types of sock knitting and do some on like fiber content. I know several of you mentioned you wanted to do a fiber content series where we just talk about what's alpaca yarn good for? Why would you use BFL as opposed to merino? What do you want to use silk for? What do you not want to use nylon for, etc. I think that's a great idea, so I'm hoping to do that in future. And I also have some more just emotional, philosophical topics. Like last week we talked about facing failure, and that was a really special video for me to share with you guys. I don't know if you guys liked it as much, but I loved getting to share that with you. I just have really felt for, even before I started the podcast, when I first had the idea to do this, I really had kind of, I hate to use the term burden on my heart because that makes me sound like my mother, but I had this like kind of niggling thought the whole time where I just constantly was thinking about wanting to do something other than just knitting, just showing techniques or just showing what I'm working on. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I love that. But from time to time, every now and then, I want to talk about the emotional side of crafting and the deeper issues going on, and kind of see if I can help offer some healing or some guidance, or just some examples from my own life to help you guys deal with, you know, whatever you're working through at the time too. Yeah, so hopefully we'll get to do some more of those. But the final thing I wanted to show you is my Swamp Witch sweater. If you guys watched the podcast last week, episode 7, Facing Failure, I showed you guys, I told a story about failure in my dye kitchens and how I had managed to overcome and redeem that. And that was kind of a lighthearted example. I also shared a much more personal, difficult, traumatic experience of failure that was a lot harder to just get over. It wasn't like I just, you know, immediately recognized the benefits and moved on. But my lighthearted example related to fiber was a dye kitchen failure that I turned around and saved and turned into a gorgeous new colorway that's now in the shop. And that is my Swamp Witch colorway, which I showed you last week. I was knitting a swatch because I wanted to cast on the I Am Groot cardigan, which has a really intricate little twisted stitches and cables in this panel up the back of the cardigan. So even though most of it's stockinette, it had this really beautiful cable panel. So I did the cable panel as a swatch to not only test gauge, but mostly to test the yarn, because this is a really heavily speckled yarn. So it's kind of busy, and I wanted to make sure it would work. And the ironic thing is I dyed this yarn originally for that cardigan, and then it failed and took a turn I wasn't expecting and turned out busier than anticipated. So after doing the swatch and showing it on the podcast and working on it a little more, and I took photos and put it on my Instagram and Facebook, and I just didn't like it. It was just too busy. It overwhelmed the cable pattern, and you didn't really get to see the cables. It just wasn't good. So I showed my husband, and he agreed it just wasn't awesome. And most of the people that commented on Instagram and Facebook also agreed. Everybody pretty much agreed with me, like, yeah, that's a gorgeous yarn, but not for that pattern. Those two don't go together well. So they broke up, and I instead cast on a free pattern that's on Ravelry, which I will link to below because it's an awesome pattern. You guys should totally go knit it, and it's free. It's the Armown cardigan by Andy Satterland, of Vintagey fame. If you guys know her, I love her patterns. They're really accessible and easy to follow. And so I cast this on. This is just a cardigan, and it's just a simple stockinette cardigan. The awesome part of this is that it has pockets in the front. So this is the bottom edge, and you start at the bottom, and then as you're working up, you divide and make these really cool pockets, and they're deep pockets, you guys. I'm so excited. You know how girls get excited over pockets because nobody ever gives us pockets in our clothes. Well, when you knit your own, you can put in as many pockets as you want. So these have these great pockets, which I'm loving, and the way she has you divide for the pockets and shape the pockets as you knit is genius and really not at all difficult. I will say I ended up ripping this one out. I started it and I started knitting up, and when I was joining the back pocket, you're supposed to pick up slipped stitches along the edge as you're knitting, and I had a little trouble seeing because my slip stitches were kind of loose, and so I couldn't see exactly, and I kept picking up twice into the same stitch instead of just once. And so my pocket started to pucker a little. And at first I thought I could just cheat my way through it, and I was like, it's not a big deal. And then I realized I'm gonna hate this if I don't rip it out, and I will never wear it. And it was causing the cardigan to kind of like pull up in the front. So I ripped it back all the way down to the ribbing and started again. And I'm so glad I took the time to rip it out, because this time it is even and perfect and beautiful, and this time I know what I'm looking for on the slip stitches, so I'm finding it very easy this time through. The first time was like a practice run where I learned how to pick up the stitches, and I've knit a ton from picked up stitches. I don't know why I was having so much trouble with it, but it just was real fusty for me. So don't get scared off. It's still a really easy pattern, and it's pretty simple. Just pay attention when you're picking up the stitches, and if it starts to go wrong, rip it out and redo it. It's worth it. And it's just a really nice, cozy little everyday kind of cardigan, but it's all stockinette except for the collar, which I think has some ribbing or something, and then the ribbing at the bottom and the button band. So I'm just really excited. I think that shows off the yarn colorway so much better than what I was doing before. This really allows the speckles to shine and really makes the beauty of the yarn pop instead of hiding it in that cable. So yeah, I'm really enjoying that knit. It's really, really fun, and I'm so excited for this sweater, you guys. The Swamp Witch colorway has just been so much fun for me, and I don't know if you guys like it as much as I do, because it's kind of a personal labor of love, but I hope you do. And I really love it, even if you don't. So, so I'm really excited for this pattern. But that is where we are going to cast off for today. We're way over time, so I'm going to let you guys go. But this is where we'll cast off. Love you.